Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Should I kill the music now? Yes. So welcome everybody to the event number 8 of entrepreneurs.of.lantau. We have created this project, community, with Joe, obviously 8 months ago. What we are trying to do is to get people together. There is amazing people in Lantau, there is amazing entrepreneur, and we really want to listen, to learn from the experience, to what they have done, what they have achieved, what they have learned as well. Me, one of my thing, Joe as well, is like to create relationship between people. As well, I'm a big fan of relationship, and I love that. And when we had the first meeting with Joe, and we talked about creating something together, I said, yeah, let's do it, 100%.
But we couldn't do it without you guys, which is the most important thing. So one of the main things that we want to try and do is we're getting different people coming, and it's lovely today. We're seeing a lot of new faces as well as old faces. So yeah, you're welcome to ask your friends. This isn't for entrepreneurs. I know it's named entrepreneur, but it's more for people who want to meet like-minded people, want to tell stories, want to hear stories, want to get to know other people, and it's trying to mix communities together. Although we're not doing very well with the local community, which would be great if we could get them as well. So anyone, if you could talk about this to other people, that would be amazing. If you could ask other people, that would be incredible.
So I will introduce myself in the presentation. So my name is Didier Pujol, and that's my face here. But apart from this and me, you guys have 2 questions. So first of all, does anyone know about Shanghai already? Super. So a couple of you. And are some of you already familiar with some of these pictures apart from the middle? And which one? Well, obviously that's a blank paper for me. So are you familiar with the characters? You know that guy? You know this lady here?
So one in the middle, it tells you something, but
yeah, that's the gangster. So my purpose tonight is to tell you about one side you don't know about me. Each time I come here, maybe 6 or 7 times, I introduce myself as the chief editor for the French newspaper community, the community newspaper in Hong Kong. And so Alexis is working in my team, and Julia also.
Welcome, Alexis.
7 or 8 people. And apart from that, I had a previous life, and this life was in Shanghai actually with my fantastic wife. I spent 7 years there. And here are a couple of parts of my personality. Some people told me you saw me swimming, so I'm a swimmer. So this is me this year. I tried the Course Harbor racing, and I swim almost every day on the Muiros Beach. One other side I just introduced is the head of the newspaper. So we run events and we run an online newspaper. Another part of me is 4 times grandfather. So I'm 60 years old now, and this is one of the last daughters. That's one of the 3 granddaughters I have, and 1 grandson. And I'm a happy grandfather. And apart from that, I was raised in Normandy, and one of the first things I got to read when I was young was Tintin. So maybe you guys know that. And Tintin is famous for the first albums, actually. The first were Tintin in Congo, Tintin in America, and one of the best albums for the Tintin experts is Tintin, the Blue Lotus. And the Blue Lotus happens to be in Shanghai, and that was actually my first contact with China from very young age on. So the first picture shows, for you guys knowing Shanghai, Nanjing Road, but in the eyes of the cartoon drawer, which is called Hergé, Georges Rémy. And this is actually Chang Zhongzhen, Chang Zhongzhen was a young Chinese Shanghai student coming to Belgium, and he met in the first time the cartoonist, and he told him about China in those years. It was 1932. And China in those years was full of plenty of things. White people, the colonists, the Japanese, because China was already invaded in 1932. And Hergé, Georges Remy, didn't know anything about China. And actually, he was the one who introduced me to China. And first thing when I get to China is to find if it was true or false. Actually, 90% of it was true, although the cartoonist never left Belgium. So he drew everything from Belgium, from stories, etc. But if you guys can read Chinese, you know this is actually real characters written by Chang Zhongzhen, and most of the characters here are real, and they would also tell about this period, fantastic period, the 1930s in Shanghai. So this was me in my previous life. Back in Shanghai, I stayed 7 years there, and I was a tourist guide. So I was doing two things. First thing is checking on the Blue Lotus. Was it true? So most of it actually happened to be true. You can find places described in the comic strip. And the other thing was discovering about what I saw, which is mainly Western architecture. If you go to Shanghai, it looks familiar to everyone because Italian would find Italian architecture, French would find French architecture, British and American also find something that is familiar to them. And you can see me commenting on the Bund with a group of people in front of which is the new part of Shanghai, which is called Pudong, so the east part of the Pu, the Huangpu, the river, and the west part is called Puxi, and in Puxi you have all this famous architecture. So I was commented for a while in a local newspaper. I was really proud of that, and people were so happy that a foreigner was interested in their history. And what's so fascinating about Shanghai is if you discover this Puxi side, which is the side on the west Bund, on the west part of the Huangpu River, it has never changed a bit. It has never not changed a bit. It's almost exactly like that today. This part is called the Bund. The Bund is an Hindi name meaning the wharf in Hindi language, and it's still called the Bund. It was the part where the colonists, the British, the American, they settled there. And all these landscapes still exist today. But there's a big difference between today and this period, which is this part. You can see it's very messy. And it was actually the first part you would discover about Shanghai. And this part was full of gangsters, thieves, all this kind of opium dealers, all this exciting life you had in those times. Rich people would be mingling with all sorts of people. And first thing you would discover when you come on those wharfs is probably that your suitcase has already disappeared. You even didn't jump on the Bund that your suitcase would disappear, because some people were under the wooden parts and they would take out the luggage from the Westerners coming into the city. So amazing strips, and today fantastic to discover again. So this was actually what was Shanghai in those years. This is a map from 1935. And if you guys are familiar with today's cities, it's exactly the same. It has not moved a bit. But from these boundaries, you can imagine here a different life. For instance, here this front part is the old Chinese village. This is the whole Shanghai, almost totally destroyed today. But you can see this shape here, and it's surrounded by Western settlements. So the longest settlements was the international settlement. Here you had the American, the British, and the French here. So those guys came from 1842 on till the end of the 30s, the 40s even. And we call settlement, or in French, concession. It was actually a deal with the Chinese people. The deal is you don't step into the Chinese city. So we concede you some land, but it's outside of the city. And the first Westerners, they had to deal with swamps here. So disease, yellow fever, everything. But after a while, of course, because so much money coming into the city, they made a city of stone, and disease came into the Chinese city, not in the western part. Foreign devils was the name the Chinese were calling the Westerners coming into the city. The whole story started with the Opium War, mid of the 19th century, a way for the British to trade with China and not pay for the goods they would buy. I mean, they were interested in silk, tea, of course, and China, porcelain in French. And after a while, at the beginning of the 19th century, they discovered that the sales balance, the commercial balance, was not totally in their favor. And they imagined growing drugs in the north of India and introducing that into China. And very quickly, the Chinese got addicted. And after, the British would control the trade of opium. After a while, they rebelled. And of course, it didn't work. The British could win over this opium war, and then say, okay, now we win over. The opium war, trade is ours. You pay for that amount of money, each ballot of opium. They would fix the prices, and they got richer and richer and richer. And of course, it was a decay of China at that moment. Chinese people call that the unfair treaties, and also it was before the Chinese communists took over power, was a disaster for Chinese people. But apart from that, if today you walk into Shanghai, you will discover all this past almost alive, because nothing has changed, at least in the old part of the cities. You can recognize here in the French concession, the Cité Bourgogne. This type of house is called Lilong, so alley house. And it was built actually from Western architects, or Chinese being trained by Western architects. A little bit like the Coron in the north of France. For workers, you make alleys of houses. But in comparison with the Chinese style of house, it was safe and sane. You didn't have disease there, because it was you had air coming into the alleys. So Cité Bourgogne you can still visit. And some interesting places become so trendy. They were the former Westerners' villas, so personal estates. And here I don't see clearly, but you can see the plane trees. You call that plane trees, les platanes, very common in Southeast Asia. A way for Westerners to bring shadow, because the Westerners, the colonists at that time, they would wear ties and costumes to impress the locals, and of course it was a bit warm. So they need shadow. And of course the coolies, the guys carrying the things, they don't need shadow on the walls. No plane trees on the bound for the hard workers. Interesting, this city, I told you about gangsters. You had small thieves, of course, on the walls, but the big thieves, they were actually in the French concession. You could see those two sides. The American concession on north of the city was full of factories. The British and the American, they used the labor to make a textile, cotton, and also after armament, so weapon. But in the French concession, no industry at all. So where the money comes from? It was actually coming from opium. In 1912, opium became illegal, and then the prices started to rise up, and the French would protect the opium trade, the illegal opium trade, and make huge money with that, and building things like the first thing, like it looks like a castle. That's actually the French Club. It's still there in Hong Kong, in Shanghai. It's called Okura Garden. It's in the middle of the city. You can still enjoy the ground floor. It's lavish, amazing. The ballroom is amazingly beautiful. And here you had a place that has now disappeared. It's called the Canidrome. It was the dog race place. It has two activities. One was betting on greyhounds. Of course, the races were tricked, and the money was actually coming to this guy, which is totally not French. Is called Douéchamp. Douéchamp is the Green Gang boss. There were 3 gangs, and he was the largest gang, the head of the largest gang. He had something like 5,000 people under his control, whereas in the French concession, only 2,000 French people. So this guy was actually controlling the city, and most of the money from the French consulate at that time, from all these premises, come from the tax on his illegal business. And including that place, run by a certain guy called Félix Bouvier. This guy was an accountant till the moment he discovered it was more lucrative, more interesting to run greyhound horses run by this guy. He was the straw man of Duéchamp. And inside the same building, you had also dance hall and plenty of activities, different activities for entertainment. And this guy here is called Joseph Chier.
It's French, it's good.
But this guy is far from poo. He's a very, very clever man. He was the head of the Chinese section of the French police. And he had control, he had connection with everyone in the city, including that guy. He was also a member of the Green Gang from Duéchamp. And he wrote his memories, an amazing book telling all the things he could do from the 30s till the time he died in 1970s or something. So he survived the Cultural Revolution, he survived the change of regime from nationalist to communist, etc., etc. And now, this guy, very clever guy, is a star, a hero. I mean, in Shanghai, he has his weapon, his plaque, all his stuff are in a police museum. And last year, he was actually studying the history of Shanghai at the university, after being involved with so many things. I told you about those guys stealing the luggage. That's actually one of his most famous cases. He could solve that. People were complaining that all the luggage or the baggage was disappearing. And he actually came to Duéchamp and he said, there's a problem here. So that's not me, that's this guy. And he was inviting the gangster or the suspects in the police station and offering them pastis. You know pastis? So pastis is a way to solve things in France. The appetizer. And after a couple of drinks, he was just explaining he was friends with this guy and said, we have a problem with the luggage. And suddenly the case was solved. So all the luggage was restored and they found the money back, they found all the things back. Very interesting. Maybe some people in journalism know that guy. He's called Albert Londres, so a famous prize for journalists now. He's famous as probably one of the most successful reporter and clever reporter. He was commenting on the wars. He was a wartime reporter. And he happened to come into Shanghai in 1932. Bad idea, because in Shanghai, actually, so things were not totally as they should be. And he discovered the thing that the opium money came to the French consulate. He gave a phone call to his journal in France, said, I'm coming with some heavy stuff. I'm coming back with some heavy stuff. You keep the headlines for me. Amazing story for you guys. And of course, he never made it back to France. So the Georges Philippard, his ship, suddenly sunk in the Aden Detroit, so in the Persic Gulf. And he was, of course, among the dead people. And Duéchamp guy told Nimbo Mushrooms affair. So this guy, again, interesting. The same year, when he was summoned by the new consul, said, okay, things are not clear here. You move out your opium from the French concession. We don't want to hear about drugs anymore. All the police is corrupted. It doesn't work like that. And say, okay. How about you come to my place? I invite you for a nice meal and a nice lunch, evening dinner. And there were many people attending the dinner at that guy's place, and half of the guests died the next week. Yeah, and of course the week after he could keep his opium into the French concession. Interesting combination here to describe those years. It could be it could look scary, but it was also most of the time perceived as amazingly interesting because of cinema, dancing, so many things happening at that time. So this lady here, I guess she would never be able to drive a car, but she was one of the first cinema stars in Shanghai time. She's called Butterfly Hu, or so Hu Jie. And she was actually used, her image was used for selling all kind of things, cars, golf clubs, whiskey, cigarettes, etc. So she was embodying actually the new way of living in those years, coming from Hollywood and transferred into China. So this face is very famous. You would see her on every single post, like selling cigarettes, alcohol, etc., soap, and she was always there. Another interesting picture is about dancing. Shanghai was famous for taxi dancing. So those girls, they were called Unu, the dancing girls, and most of them, those girls, they would you have to buy tickets for a dance, and then, for instance, in the Canidrome, that's the place for the dance hall I show you. You would pay for a dance with these wonderful ladies. And at that time, you had probably hundreds of dance hall everywhere in the city, from very poor for the sailors near the Bund to upper end, like in the Canidrome or the French Club. This is actually still visible in the French Club, now the Opera Garden. That's the Art Deco ceiling lamp. So still there. And the floor, dance floor, is actually still the same like in the 30s. Under the floor, you have some little springs to make sure that in the French Club, you would dance better than anywhere else. You are lighter when you dance at the French Club. So all kind of competition, those small things, dance hall competing with each other. And people would say, Ma Jiao Pao, Wu Jiao Tiao means whatever happens elsewhere, there would be war, there would be in Japanese invasion, you still dance and you still bet on horses. And it totally describes the way of living of those years. Interesting, starting to tell about people, and I will tell about personal stories after, but just to understand what kind of people were in town. So I told you about those guys, the French and the police a little bit corrupted. And on the Bund, you had this guy. Does somebody know this guy? So this guy is called Victor Sassoon. And Victor Sassoon is the one actually building the current Peace Hotel. It was called the Cathay Hotel. At that time was the best hotel on the east of the Suez Canal. That was actually the real advertising. And to understand how high was his ego, as he was a billionaire, so he wanted people to know he was so rich. So he actually asked the municipal council, the International Settlement Municipal Council, to lower the Bank of China that was built close to him. So he said, so normally this should be the tallest building on the Bund, but he said, no way, you guys can't build that. It was Shanghai Sheikh doing that, and then he had to cut his building, and then the months after, he built this small turret here to make sure he had the biggest, the tallest one. Till today, this is one of the most beautiful places in Shanghai, including the ballroom, which is one of the rarest ballroom on earth, Art Deco, square type, and fantastic indirect lighting. One of the first ballroom also with air condition in those years. And Mr. Sassoon was famous to invite over all the movie stars, the Hollywood stars, coming to Shanghai, including Charlie Chaplin. Here on this side, you may discover that's Marlene Dietrich, so the Hollywood star. He was actually living there on the 11th floor. And he had a suite with two stories. And of course, most of the ladies would come up after the party. To understand a little bit about the Sassoon family and migration, this is the grandfather of Victor. Doesn't look exactly the same. This guy was actually from Sephardim Jewish immigration coming from Iraq. And the first Sephardim, they came first to India. And then when it was about investing in a new city like Shanghai, they turned themselves into British style. This is one of the first sons of Victor Sassoon, David Sassoon. And you've seen this gentleman. He was raised in England, Victor. And that's me in the Peace Hotel. So I had the favor of my wife for one of my birthday. I could stay in the Indian suite at the Peace Hotel, which is still visible today. That's probably one of the only remaining suites from totally untouched till the 30s. Indian style, like Indian family. Yeah. And I'm so fond of this guy. I went to visit his photo albums in Dallas, Texas. And you can actually find so many interesting things in these albums. He was actually documenting his lifestyle. So here, that's the Canidrome. You see, he was invited over there. And here is Mr. Charlie Chaplin, and also a guy, the French poet Jean Cocteau, visiting Shanghai. Yeah. And he has a strange habit of writing the names in different colors. If your name was underlined in red, that means you own money to him. If the name is in blue, and that's probably the last time he invite you over because you don't pay him. And that was his way of using his book note, exactly like we do now with Apple or whatever, iPhone. Amazing. So let's come to personal stories. This is interesting. The past is interesting, but so many people have connection with these cities, including the people that have families staying there in those years. So as a tourist guide, after a while, I happened to have some strange requests. One of the first requests was from a Russian origin lady. She's this lady, Lilian. I read her book about her memories, and she explained that her family comes from Russia, another Jewish immigration, and she was raised actually in a French concession. And I was amazed by this book. It was so interesting. I said, if you come to Shanghai, stay in my place. And then she said, okay, I'm coming. And she stayed in my place 3 months. So it was amazing. I could visit the city with the eyes of somebody who was born in Shanghai, raised in Shanghai, educated in Shanghai, seeing Mao coming into power, Japanese invasion, etc. Amazing. So living memories. Some other experience was with people descending from Canadian police in the international settlement. And I will tell you also about somebody which is totally mixed, coming from Macau, Portuguese origin. And his descendants now, they were raised in New Mexico in US. And he said, my grandfather is a cowboy. I was raised in shooting and doing the lasso thing, but my grandmother is Chinese, and he needed to reconcile everything. So let's talk about this first lady. So the Lilian Villens, she was born in 1927, and she's now 95 or something. And amazing, this story. She is Russian origin, Jewish, American. She speaks French. But Chinese know her as the only white Chinese in town in those years because she has no paper. You probably know the Jewish people were expelled from different countries. We know Germany, but before that, the pogroms in Russia made them stateless. And Shanghai at that time was the only place you could stay with no paper. And she got so many articles written about her. She's the paperless lady of Shanghai. But that's actually her first passport. It was drawn in Tokyo by the headquarters of General MacArthur, and they didn't know how to qualify her. She was no Chinese. She was no, and she put a stamp Chinese, white Chinese. And that was the first time she got her identity, and then she could come to US. And now she's retired, but she was a French teacher in Washington for many years. So this is the French college, the French school. And now it's the Scientific Institute, but still in place. And we could visit that with Lilian, and she showed me the place when she attended class. So that's the story of Liliane, immigration coming from Russia, Qingdao, somebody is from Qingdao. So the Russian Jewish, they settled first in Dongbei, so in the northeast part of China, and then they came to Shanghai, and after the war, they got the opportunity to go elsewhere, Australia, California, Canada. So these are her parents. And amazing, this lady, because of so many identities, she is one of the probably liveliest person I've ever met. She said, well, Didier, I'm here in Shanghai, now you invite me over to all the groups, all the communities around. So I can speak in Russian, I can speak in Yiddish, I can speak in French, American, whatever. So okay, we organized at the Shanghai synagogue. So we went there, and then she was explaining, I'm so good to be back again in my community. I can't stand those American people. I can't stand, and people say, well, yeah. And the next day, she was in the Russian consulate, said, wow, so good to be among my fellow men. Those French, I hate them. Wow. And she did it. I could see her. She was doing the adaptation exercise all the time. Amazing. And that's actually her. She might be somewhere here with the glasses. That's her. Yeah, her. That's the first time she received a prize at the French school. And this hall still exists. That's in the French school I showed you. So amazing lady, so adaptative, and yeah, captivating. A little bit about some information about this particular period of Shanghai. When the Japanese invaded Shanghai, first time in 1932, and then after in 1937, and then after Pearl Harbor also 41. So step after step, every 5 years they would invade more part of Shanghai. But in the middle of the French concession, in the middle of the international settlement, until the Japanese were not here, they were ignoring totally what's happening around. So as we said before, and that's the type of movies you would see. So Errol Flynn, Clark Gable, all these comedies, Laurel and Hardy. And if you read the papers from this period, you read in the newspaper, oh, sorry, tonight, Japanese invasion, no electricity, no cinema. But the next day, say, oh, electricity again, that's Charles Chaplin tonight, the great dictator. So people, so you could die 300 meters away, the Westerners, they would not care. And this, I showed you about dancing. These are actually the dance tickets to book ladies. You want the taxi dancing, you buy, and you see all these places. So, and the prices are so different. If you go to Palais Café, which is in the Blood Alley in Shanghai, behind the barn for sailors, it's very cheap. But if you go to Del Monte, which is on the west side of Shanghai, it's of course far more expensive. And some of the ladies, they would actually have so many revenues, cinema during the day, sponsor during their life, and also dancing, so they were collecting money. And the figures from this period show that probably 2 ladies out of 3 would prostitute themselves. It was also a way to raise up in the society. It was totally admitted. In those years also, I told you about the Jewish refugee. When the Japanese came over, you had the creation of the Jewish quarter. And the Jewish people were actually saved from the Holocaust in Europe. And so many Jewish families were saved because they could stay there, and the Japanese never sent them to the German. Interesting also the magazines. So probably this lady doesn't know how to swim, like exactly Roudier doesn't know how to drive a car or to play golf. It's just an image to make consumption, consumerism. Yeah. Second story, I met this guy. I met actually the descendant of this guy, who is called Carlos Lubeck. Strange name, Carlos is Spanish or Portuguese. So this guy was actually from Swedish origin. His father was a Swedish sailor. His ship sunk actually in Macau, and he was actually taken care of by a Portuguese origin family. So they named him Carlos. He became Christian. And when he moved to Shanghai, he became the head of the Compagnie des Tramways d'Électricité, which was actually the largest public company in town, running the trams and bringing electricity services. And interesting, this couple, that's very rare that some people would marry with Chinese. So he dared to marry with a Chinese lady just because he was Catholic, she was Catholic, that was good enough for him. So very different from the type of this period. And he raised 3 sons, and the house behind is still standing. That's one of the most renowned architects called Paul Wesser, designing those villas and designing also the club that I showed you. And having a house designed by Wesser showed actually that you were actually well off. So from very poor, he became quite a respected person. So this is actually what Carlos' family did as a trouble. Very different type of immigration. There were actually 1,000, 1,500 Macanese people in Shanghai, in what became the Japanese Quarter after. And I received the visit of this gentleman. So this gentleman is actually his descendant. That's James, I remember. James is on the left, and that's his partner here. And we are actually standing in front of the family house. And guess what is the family house now? It's a trendy bar. It's just a trendy bar. People like it to go outside and have drinks and cocktails. But when we came into that trendy bar, we came into the kitchen and could actually see the old paintings dating from the age. His grandfather was there. And that's the maternity, so you say maternity? So still standing today, it's a hospital, a Beijing hospital. That's the place where his grandmother was born. We could visit that. First story, very different. These guys from the police, but that's the International Settlement Police. Mark, this guy, he married a Filipino lady, American Filipino, because Philippines were actually a colony of America at that time. And this couple is strange. The guy comes from Canada. The lady her parents were coming from the Philippines, and she was actually more senior than him in the police. She was the first female American marshal in the East. And she solved so many serial killer cases. So Tulita came, she's famous. You look for papers about Tulita King, you would find articles about solving the serial killer's case. And he was a sergeant. So that's the trip those guys were doing. You see how Shanghai was attracting people from all over the world for different reasons. So he was looking for a job, and Tulita was well educated. Her parents were already settling in the city, and she could access to the university, and she was trained into a very, very talented and senior police officer. Yeah, and guess who is this guy? So that's that's Bob. He's the grandson of this couple. So during the Japanese invasion, something very ugly happened to the British and the American citizens. First, if you were in the police, you were immediately tagged as a spy. So you were taken by the Kampetai, which is the equivalent of the Gestapo in the Japanese army. And you would be put into this house, which is still standing here. It's called Bridge House. And Bridge House was actually a torture center. And his father, unfortunately, Bob, was tortured by the Japanese and died very quickly after the war. And we visited with the place with Bob, and it was very emotional because you could feel in that place the suffering. People were buried in the courtyard, so there are ghosts going on there. So I don't tell you about the details about the type of torture, but it was it was terrible. So there were tears, of course, there. And there were tears also here when we found the apartments of this family, and we could actually discuss and be invited over by the Chinese family staying there and say, I remember you. So Bob said, it's not possible. Yeah. A 4-year-old boy playing in the courtyard with us, that was you. So we don't know if it's true or if they wanted to be friendly or not, but it was very emotional too. And Bob's son is here, and so also his partner. As we talk about transmission, Bob is the head of a college in Canada, and he definitely wanted to take his son here to transmit, to pass over the memories. We could also visit the place where his mother was actually interned. The British citizens were also interned. Now it's a school, but it was a very harsh condition also, prisoners camp. So all the British, they were taken into camps. So what about me in all that? So I told you about the Blue Lotus, but I happened to meet a lady called Claire Chao. She lives in Hawaii, and she is famous for writing the memories about her mother called Isabel. Isabel was actually not a who knew, but she was in those fantastic years, dancing, crazy about dancing, meeting a Westerner in the 30s and passing from one ballroom to the other. So that's Isabel, that's her mother. And when I met Claire, she said, well, how about your father? And I said, well, my father, he didn't want to tell me about his personal story. And I realized I would knew more about other people's story than my own family. But my family actually comes from a very interesting background. My father comes from French Algeria, and if you think of it, it was more or less like French Shanghai, because the Westerners were actually separated from the local people until they got independence. That's actually my father. I found a picture of him here. And I said, Papa, I found a photo of you on the internet. And said, oh, can you find that? And suddenly he started to speak and say, oh, that's Maurice here, and that's Robert, and that's my famous math teacher. I love it so much. He started to tell stories. I said, wow, I should push. And I pushed. I sent photos and photos and photos, until the point that I said, well, that's my family story. So I'm from Spanish origin. I told someone tonight. So I come from my grand-grandfather comes from Mallorca, Palma de Mallorca, and my grand-grandmother comes from Valencia in Spain. And the Spanish, the Italian, the Jewish, they actually were those people being given a lot of land in French Algeria, and they started a life anew. That's the story of my family. Yeah, and as that's my father now. And you can see here, that's lepetitjournal.com. And I found a trick, actually. I called my colleague in Algiers and said, well, how about you write about French people staying in Algiers in those periods? Oh, yeah, I would be so interested. And then she called my father and said, we're interested in your story. And he told the whole stuff into the Petit Journal Algeria. And then suddenly I said, well, that's interesting. And our whole family was so happy coming back to my father and said, you never told that to us. So actually, there was the independence war, many terrorist attacks, many people dying. He was actually 18 when he met my mother. He was actually playing music in local bands. And one of that night was also a terrorist attack. 30 people died with 2 bombs at a crossroad. And he was actually shocked saying that. And very recently, he said, you know, I became adult so quickly. So he turned into a young boy, into an adult, and feeling the burden of responsibility. And he of course, didn't want to share those bad memories with us. But that's important. I wanted to have at least the same amount of stories from my family than other stories. And then I got the whole thing. So his friends, the name of his friends, the places he liked, the type of candies he liked, etc. And guess what? We go together back to Algeria this coming July. I've never been there, and he's never been there again since they left after all the French had to leave. So I wanted to share these stories with you. Last but not the least, I'm also turning back to Shanghai very quickly because I'm taking on the journal in Shanghai and Beijing in addition to Hong Kong. So I'm happy because things finally get a meaning. Yeah, and if you want to know more stories, here are a few links. First one is my blog, writing the blog for 7 years about all Shanghai stories, if you want any. And the newspaper in Hong Kong, so some Chinese stories there, and also the one in Algiers, if you look for this article. Thank you so much. You guys have any question? Or?
Yeah, I have a question. With the expat community in Shanghai after the communists liberated Shanghai, did you have any foreigners that stayed in Shanghai? You had famous red families in Beijing.
Yeah.
But I don't know of many foreign families that remained in Shanghai and became, many the Beijing ones worked for the PLA or as doctors or as teachers.
It depends on the community, but for instance, this Mr. Félix Bouvier, so he was actually quite wealthy, and the communist new rulers, they had a trick to get back the money. They say, well, we like you, but do you like us? So it means, are you ready to cooperate? And of course, you have to say yes, but that means also, well, you give us your car, you give us your club, etc. And so many people were tricked into that. They stayed for 1 or 2 years, just the time period to be dispossessed of all their properties. So it was the case for wealthy people. The head of the Shell company, those providing oil for the new regime, the guy selling cars, the guy in charge of Renault, the famous brand, because it was useful. And after they had nothing, they left, of course. And so that was for the very few staying in town. And some couples were special when they married local people, they would stay also. But as you could imagine, there were not too many mixed marriages in those times. But most of them, they left immediately. Especially the Jewish people was the only possibility for them finally to leave and to get a visa, to get a passport. So many left for Australia. The other, probably 2/3 of the Jewish community now in Australia, in Sydney and Melbourne, they come from Shanghai. And the other third is in US, probably more or less. So that's for the Jewish. You had also so much immigration here in Hong Kong, especially the Russians. There's this Russian culture going on in the 50s here. There was those guys running restaurants, because we would speak French in old Shanghai, but most of the people speaking French were the Russians. Those white Russians being educated because they were from the elite part of Russia, and they lost, of course, everything. So, for instance, the Hong Kong police for a while, they were only Russian people, right Russian, because those guys were trained into sword and military. So they were chasing the pirates. So the British loved them a lot. And the other part of the Russian community, they were actually running restaurants, very famous restaurants here, like Le Coq or something in Kowloon. And now you still have one, which is from, and still you can steal some Russian dishes here, coming from this immigration. So, yeah, any other interesting or things that you would like to know? No, I did not. It was existing before. It's a 20 years old journal running all over the planet. It's 72 cities, and that's a license model. So I pay for the brand, and I run it for
4 years.
4 or 5 years. Yeah, 4 years.
Yeah, I met Didier 4 years ago, and it's funny because you can see that his influence in Hong Kong with the French community is getting stronger and stronger, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I try to connect people too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share this with you, but yeah.
Yeah, the stories are fascinating. I just wonder what elements of Shanghai or Hong Kong society interest you most today?
A very interesting question. Year after year, it's disappearing. I was quite lucky. I was quite lucky when staying there. I could access daily to the French library, the Jesuit library, and I could read the newspaper from those years. So I had all the crusty stories. I knew where the people who stay. I had photographs from them when they were young, etc. Amazing. So you're living in the past on the daily basis. Now you can't access anymore. It's considered as Chinese heritage, etc. And for the heritage architecture, same story. Of course, the bond is still there, but very difficult to access into buildings now. A lot of bar one, so those guys, you have to show you have a right to come in. And it's moving all the time because Shanghai is a fast-moving city. I was amazed last time I was there, last September. The Nanjing Road, which is the main road, turned into pedestrian road. When I was there were plenty of cars. It was not pleasant to walk there. Now it's so pleasant. It's full of brands, and it's become a shopping mall. So depending on what's important at the moment, the focus will be very quickly transferred to luxury goods, into mass market, etc. But most of the heritage building, the Western, they still stay, but it's not as easy as in the past to get into it. And the Chinese part totally destroyed the whole city because they consider they have a lot of Chinese architecture everywhere. They can build high-rise, and the whole city, the square city, you can actually lose yourself and speak with grannies over there and spend hours playing mahjong with people you would not know an hour before. So friendly, like in the south of France or Spain, etc. And now it's finished. This way of life is finished. It's totally flattened, and that's high-rise. It's moving fast. Yeah. Well.
Thank you so much.
Let's have a drink.